In a hidden corner of Kensington Palace, Princess Catherine uncovered a dust-covered trunk sealed since the late 1990s, once part of Princess Diana's private suite. Inside, a sapphire pendant and handwritten note brought Catherine to tears, revealing a deeply personal gift meant for the woman who would hold William's heart. The quiet day that changed everything. It began as an ordinary summer afternoon inside Kensington Palace. The corridors were calm, the air thick with the muted hum of activity from distant offices. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had taken the rare opportunity to stroll through parts of the palace she rarely visited, spaces closed off for years, some untouched since the late 1990s. One of these was a long, unused storage room tucked into a quiet wing of the palace. Once, decades ago, it had been part of Princess Diana's private suite. But after her passing, the door had been closed and locked. The room remained sealed through multiple renovations, the kind of forgotten place where history lingered in the air. That day, staff from the archival department were deep into a reorganization project, moving boxes and cataloging old items for preservation. The work was dusty and methodical, a far cry from the elegance of state rooms, but it was here, amid stacks of faded labels and brittle tape, that something unusual was found. Pushed far into the corner, half hidden behind a shelf of unused furniture, was a dust-covered trunk bearing the official Buckingham Palace seals. The thick brass lock had dulled with age, and across the top was a faint scrawl in faded ink. The staff paused, uncertain whether it was part of the official royal collection or something privately stored long ago. When Catherine stepped into the room, the find was quickly mentioned. She listened, her eyes settling on the trunk. Something about it, the seals, the sense of time clinging to it, stirred her curiosity. Without hesitation, she insisted she would be the one to open it. No one knew then what was inside. For Catherine, it was a moment of quiet anticipation, not realizing she was minutes away from holding a piece of Diana's life that had been locked away for more than a quarter of a century. The trunk's mysterious origin. The lock was stiff, but when it finally clicked open, the first thing Catherine noticed was the handwriting on the interior label. Slanted, looping, unmistakable. It was Princess Diana's own hand, spelling out the words, "Personal. To be kept safe." The origin of the trunk was quickly traced. Transport records showed it had been moved from Highgrove House in 1993 during the period of Diana's separation from Charles. After her death in 1997, it had been sealed again and sent to royal storage, bypassing the main cataloging system. Over the years, it had shifted locations, landing eventually in this forgotten corner of Kensington. Only 3 people were recorded as having access to it in the last 25 years, none of them current palace staff. Strangely, it had never been formally logged into the royal collection's inventory, meaning it was, in the official sense, a forgotten item. The absence of paperwork only deepened the mystery. Why had it been kept outside the formal system? Was it intentional? A way to keep certain items private, away from the public eye? The fact that Diana herself had marked it personal suggested it was never meant to be absorbed into the vast machinery of royal record-keeping. Inside, the air carried the faintest trace of perfume. Floral, warm, instantly familiar to those who had known her. Tissue-wrapped parcels filled the space, their edges yellowed with age, and there, tied neatly with ribbon, were handwritten notes addressed to William and Harry. But what drew Catherine's gaze most was a small box, its lid marked in the same handwriting. For future Princess of Wales. She didn't open it right away. For a moment, she simply stared, absorbing the significance of the words. This was not just a collection of mementos. It was a message. A deliberate act of preservation from a woman who had lived her life under relentless public scrutiny, yet still found space to think about the one who would someday walk the same path she had. Catherine's fingers rested on the lid, her breath catching. The next moment would reveal not only what Diana had left behind, but what she had foreseen. First glimpse inside. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she peeled back the trunk's first layer of tissue-wrapped parcels. The paper was thin, delicate, almost brittle with age. A faint scent drifted upward. That signature perfume Diana had favored, instantly recognizable to those who had ever been near her. It wasn't overpowering, just a whisper of the past that seemed to seep straight into the present. One by one, Catherine lifted the carefully wrapped bundles. Inside were handwritten notes, each tied with ribbon and addressed in Diana's unmistakable pen to William and Harry. The ink had faded just enough to remind you of the years gone by, yet the care in every curve of the letters made them feel fresh, personal, and full of life. Then, resting gently to one side, a smaller box caught her attention. Its lid bore a message that stopped her heart for a moment. For future Princess of Wales. The words were simple, but the meaning landed with a weight she couldn't quite measure. Her breath slowed. Around her, staff instinctively stepped back, sensing that this was no ordinary find. Catherine's eyes remained fixed on the box. She hadn't expected this. She had imagined trinkets, maybe old photographs, perhaps a charity speech or a personal letter. But this was something else entirely. Before opening it, she let her gaze wander through the rest of the trunk's contents. There were bundles of photographs, most of them from private charity visits that had never been released to the public. Some showed Diana sitting cross-legged on the floor with children in hospital wards. Others captured her laughing unguardedly with patients at AIDS clinics. These were not staged royal portraits. They were moments stripped of ceremony, pure and human. Catherine felt her throat tighten. It was as if she were meeting Diana not as the world's icon, but as the woman William had known. The mother who had shaped him in ways Catherine saw every day in their home. Her fingers brushed across a worn, leather-bound notebook, its corners scuffed from use. She opened it to see sketches of evening gowns, some never made, and handwritten ideas for charity events. Between the designs were diary-like entries, small paragraphs about her hopes for William and Harry, and quiet admissions about her fears for their future in the public eye. By the time Catherine turned back to the small ribboned box, her eyes were glistening. This wasn't just an archive. It was a living message, preserved by a woman who had known that love, duty, and sacrifice would one day pass to someone else's shoulders. With a steadying breath, Catherine reached for the box. The forgotten gift revealed. The ribbon slipped away easily, and the lid opened with a soft creak. Nestled inside was a delicate sapphire pendant, its rich blue stone glimmering faintly in the muted light. Catherine's breath caught. The sapphire was an unmistakable match to the engagement ring William had given her, the very one that had once graced Diana's hand. Beside it lay a folded note in Diana's flowing handwriting. For the woman who holds William's heart. The words were direct, tender, almost prophetic. Catherine's hand instinctively went to her chest as she read it again, the meaning settling in her heart. This wasn't just jewelry, it was a blessing. The pendant itself had history. A small inscription on the back identified it as part of a Saudi royal gift set given to Diana in 1981. Alongside the stone was a thin envelope containing pressed flowers from Diana's favorite garden at Kensington. The petals were fragile, their colors muted with age, yet they carried a quiet beauty that seemed untouched by time. Catherine's tears came freely now. The thought that Diana had not only kept these items safe, but had envisioned the woman who would one day wear them was overwhelming. In that moment, the decades between them seemed to collapse. It was as if Diana were in the room, offering acceptance, offering love. William's arrival only deepened the moment. Drawn by a message from one of the staff, he stepped quietly into the room and saw the pendant in Catherine's hands. Without a word, he picked up his mother's note, reading it slowly. His jaw tightened slightly, but his eyes softened. "She knew you before she met you," he said at last, his voice low. They stood together, not speaking, just holding the piece of history between them. The pendant was no longer simply an heirloom. It had become a symbol, a connection between past and present, a thread binding Diana's love to their marriage, to their family, to the monarchy's future. In that locked-away trunk, Diana had left more than jewels and papers. She had left a message across time, one that had finally reached the woman she had quietly chosen decades earlier. Emotional weight of the find. For several moments, Catherine couldn't bring herself to move. The sapphire pendant lay in her palm, cool and solid, yet somehow impossibly fragile in its meaning. Around her, the quiet hum of the palace felt distant, like she had stepped into a bubble where only she, Diana, and this shared thread of history existed. She had seen Diana through photographs, documentaries, and William's memories, but this was different. This was Diana's handwriting, her scent, her deliberate choice to preserve something so personal for a woman she would never meet. It was a gesture that transcended time, a bridge between two princesses of Wales who would walk the same public path, one beginning it, the other continuing it. Catherine's mind moved quickly through the images she had just seen in the trunk. The private hospital visits, the unposed laughter with patients, the small diary notes written late at night. She imagined Diana sitting in a quiet room decades ago, tucking away the pendant and pressing those flowers from her favorite garden into paper, thinking about a future she could not see, but could somehow feel. The weight of it wasn't just emotional, it was symbolic. The pendant was more than jewelry. It was a blessing, a transfer of trust, and an unspoken message. Protect him. Protect this life. Catherine's throat tightened as she remembered her own early days in the royal family. The scrutiny, the headlines, the need to maintain dignity when every gesture was analyzed. She had often wondered how Diana had endured it with such grace, even when the world knew she was suffering. Now, holding the pendant, she felt that grace reaching toward her like an embrace. One of the staff members who had been present quietly stepped back, giving her space. An aide later described the moment as like mother and daughter meeting across time. The comment stayed with Catherine because that's exactly what it felt like. She turned the pendant over again, tracing the tiny inscription. Her vision blurred slightly, and she realized her tears were falling faster now. Not from sadness, but from an overwhelming sense of connection. The photographs of private charity work had struck her just as deeply. These were not the carefully choreographed royal visits that made front-page news. They were snapshots of quiet kindness. Diana sitting at a child's bedside, holding hands with a patient others had shunned, leaning in to listen with genuine interest. Catherine thought about her own projects, her own belief that the monarchy's survival depended on being real to the people they served. This was Diana showing her the blueprint. She knew instantly she would treasure this pendant for the rest of her life. But more than that, she would live up to the spirit in which it had been given. It was not just a gift. It was an unspoken vow. William's reaction. The moment William stepped into the room, Catherine could see from his expression that the staff had told him something of what had been found. But nothing prepared him for the sight of the sapphire pendant resting in her hands. He walked slowly toward her, his gaze fixed on the box and its contents. Catherine passed him the folded note, watching as his eyes moved over the words, "For the woman who holds William's heart." For a long while, he said nothing. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy with understanding. Catherine could almost see the memories flickering behind his eyes. His mother wearing the Saudi sapphire set during state visits, her laughter in private moments, the way she had carried herself with courage even when the world knew her struggles. Finally, he looked up. "She knew you before she met you," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but his hand tightened slightly on the edge of the box. It wasn't just sentiment. It was recognition of his mother's foresight, her ability to plan for a future she would never live to see. They stood together, side by side, both looking down at the pendant. For William, the connection was even more layered. It wasn't just a gift to Catherine. It was one last way his mother had reached out to him, reminding him that love, trust, and legacy were all intertwined. He told Catherine that he remembered the original set vividly. She wore it in Riyadh and again at that gala in London, he recalled, his tone soft. She said the blue made her feel strong. He smiled faintly, then suggested that Catherine should only wear it on occasions that honored his mother's causes. They spoke quietly for a few more minutes, their words weaving between memories and promises. William admitted he wanted the find kept private until it could be properly catalogued. This wasn't a piece to be thrown into public view as gossip fodder. It was too precious, too personal. As he held the pendant for the first time, his thumb brushed over the cool stone. In that small, instinctive movement, Catherine saw the boy who had once held his mother's hand, the teenager who had walked behind her coffin, and the man determined to protect the family he now led. When he handed it back to her, there was no need for more words. They both understood. This was not just an heirloom. It was a piece of their story, one Diana had begun writing long before they ever met. Diana's charitable legacy in the box. Once the pendant was safely set aside, Catherine returned to the dusty trunk, still half full of carefully wrapped bundles. It was as if every layer held another piece of Diana's private world, one not shaped for cameras or protocol, but for truth. Beneath a stack of faded tissue, she found letters addressed not to family or friends, but to hospitals, hospices, and charities. Most were thank you notes Diana had written after unannounced visits, places she had slipped into without the press to avoid spectacle. The handwriting was familiar now, but the words struck Catherine like something entirely new. They were warm, personal, free of formality. She signed off not as Princess of Wales, but simply as Diana. Several letters had responses tucked alongside them, heartfelt replies from children's wards, thanking her for sitting on the floor with young patients or reading them bedtime stories. One nurse wrote, "Your visit didn't just lift their spirits, it lifted ours." Catherine read it twice, feeling a deep resonance with her own experiences visiting hospitals where the smallest gestures seemed to matter the most. Another bundle contained Polaroid photographs, candid, slightly faded, their edges curled from age. These weren't staged moments for public relations. They were snapshots of Diana laughing with AIDS patients in the late 1980s, holding the hand of a man in a hospice, kneeling to listen to a child in a wheelchair. Many of these images had never been published. Some, Catherine realized, might never have been meant for public eyes at all. Next, there were pages from a personal diary, written in looping script on thick cream paper. The entries were brief but revealing, notes about her hopes for William and Harry's futures, her fears about their upbringing in the public gaze, and reflections on the balance between royal duty and personal happiness. One passage stood out. If they are loved for who they are, not what they are, they will survive this life. Catherine paused over the words, feeling the weight of their truth. There were also sketches for charity event gowns, quick pencil drawings annotated with fabric swatches, ideas scribbled in the margins. It was a side of Diana that few saw. The planner, the organizer, the woman who used her image strategically to elevate causes close to her heart. At the very bottom, Catherine found receipts, modest, almost mundane, until she noticed the amounts and destinations. Diana had quietly paid for medical equipment, school renovations, Zerdisk and housing for displaced families, all without public acknowledgement. She had used her resources not for status, but for change. Catherine sat back on her heels, her eyes glistening again. The pendant had been a personal blessing, but this was Diana's blueprint for compassion in action. It was proof that her legacy wasn't just about what she wore or where she stood, but about the countless lives she touched quietly, with no cameras present. Historical and cultural significance. In the days after the discovery, Catherine began to understand just how rare the pendant truly was. When jewelry experts were discreetly consulted, they confirmed it was part of an 11-piece sapphire suite gifted to Diana by the Saudi royal family in 1981 as a wedding present. Most of the set had been worn only a handful of times, and the pendant itself had never been seen in public. But what struck cultural historians most was not the stone's rarity, it was the foresight of Diana's inscription, "For the woman who holds William's heart." The wording bridged personal affection with royal tradition, consciously passing something deeply symbolic to a future Princess of Wales. This wasn't an accident of sentiment, it was intentional legacy planning. The discovery sparked quiet conversations within the palace. How many other personal heirlooms were still tucked away in forgotten corners of royal storage? The royal family's history was layered with ceremonial treasures, but personal items, those meant for specific individuals rather than the crown, were far rarer and often disappeared from public knowledge entirely. Catherine's find also reconnected her to a tradition older than many realized: the passing of symbolic consort heirlooms. In centuries past, items like brooches, lockets, and rings had been gifted to incoming queens and princesses not for their monetary value, but to carry forward personal blessings, alliances, and memories. In this case, the pendant carried double weight. It was not just a gift from a previous Princess of Wales, it was from one whose public life had been marked by both adoration and tragedy. Wearing it would not simply be a fashion choice, it would be a statement, tying Catherine's role to Diana's legacy in a way no speech or gesture could replicate. Experts noted that if displayed publicly, the pendant would draw global attention. Its combination of royal provenance, personal inscription, and connection to Diana would make it one of the most recognizable jewels in modern royal history. Yet William and Catherine were deliberate in their decision. It would remain a private possession, not formally part of the Crown's collection. Plans began quietly for a temporary exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum. alongside selected items from Diana's humanitarian work. The idea was not to glorify the monarchy, but to humanize it, to show the public that behind the grandeur were individuals whose private choices shaped public history. A portion of ticket sales would be directed to Diana's memorial fund, linking the display directly to causes she championed. For Catherine, the cultural significance was clear. She was now both guardian and steward of an object that was as much about love as it was about history. In her hands, the pendant was safe, its story intact, and its future, like Diana's memory, unshakably protected. Decision on the pendant's future. Once the trunk's contents were catalogued and returned to the vault, William and Catherine quietly discussed the pendant's future. This was more than jewelry. It was about how to honor Diana without diminishing her memory. They agreed instantly. The pendant would remain in their private possession, not part of the crown's collection. It wasn't for state loans or endless public display. It was a personal gift from a mother to the woman she hoped would love and protect her son. Still, Catherine felt millions who cherished the people's princess deserved to see it. Briefly, the compromise was a 6-week exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum, not as a standalone jewel, but part of a larger display of Diana's humanitarian work, letters, photographs, sketches, and the receipts Catherine had found, displayed beside its original note. For the woman who holds William's heart and pressed flowers from Diana's garden, it would become a story about service, compassion, and connection. Proceeds would go to Diana's memorial fund, children's hospices, and AIDS research. "It's different from wearing it," Catherine told an aide. "When I wear it, it belongs to us. In a case, it belongs to everyone, for a little while." William simply replied, "That's exactly what she'd want." Catherine's public tribute. The exhibition broke attendance records, renewing public affection for Diana's legacy. But Catherine's most powerful statement came months later at a children's hospice event in Norfolk. She arrived in a navy dress, and around her neck, the sapphire pendant. Cameras caught the deep blue stone glinting in the low sun. Her speech focused on compassion without boundaries. Kindness is not a public performance. It is what we do when no one is watching. The audience knew whose philosophy she was echoing. Reporters called it a visual handshake across generations. The pendant wasn't just jewelry. It was a bridge between two princesses of Wales. Social media lit up with side-by-side images of Diana and Catherine, captions reading, "The legacy lives on." William, standing nearby, watched with quiet pride. By night's end, hospice donations had risen by 40%, and Kensington Palace received letters thanking Catherine for keeping Diana's heart alive. For Catherine, the pendant was never about possession. It was a responsibility. And that day, she fulfilled it not with grandeur, but with the same quiet service Diana had always believed in. What began as a quiet day turned into a life-changing discovery. The pendant now rests safely with Catherine, worn only on moments honoring Diana's legacy. Across time and silence, a mother's blessing reached its mark, binding two princesses of Wales in love, legacy, and an unbroken thread of compassion.